Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new session with Rights and Responsibilities Awareness Initiative. Today, we are super lucky to have Samantha Carter to talk to us about very important and sensitive topic, the Canadian workspace culture and environment. Thank you, Samantha, for being here today with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Heatham. It is my pleasure to be here with you to talk about this particular topic that is near and dear to my heart. At one point in my past, I happened to be a newcomer to Canada myself, along with my parents. That said, we had a number of advantages that a lot of newcomers today don't necessarily have, in that we came from a country that had a similar political system. We also spoke English as our first language. So our adaptation was a little bit easier than what some newcomers face today. And it was a number of years before I had to enter the Canadian workplace. So I got to adapt to Canadian culture before I had to enter the workspace. So when I finally did enter the workspace, I entered it as a human resources professional. And over the course of my career, I had a really great opportunity in a number of different industries to work with newcomers. And I had the pleasure of helping them integrate into the organization. One in particular I worked with that had temporary foreign workers where English was not their first language. And part of my responsibility was education and training, as well as helping them to adapt culturally to the environment, the workplace environment. So there are a number of different challenges that occur when entering a workplace as a newcomer to Canada. And depending on where your home country is and what their workplace culture may have been during your working experience, it may be a little bit more challenging with the adaptation. Employment and Social Development Canada say that the two biggest obstacles facing newcomers today is specifically cultural adaptation and soft skill requirements, which is not really a surprise considering that soft skill requirements or soft skills development really comes from the culture in which you grow up in and in the workplace that you are acclimatized to. So what we're going to talk about in terms of cultural adaptation today is really just some of the key components of culture that you can see in a Canadian workplace. And we are going to talk a little bit in generalizations, so bear with me for that. And I just want to mention as a little bit of a disclaimer, not all Canadians or Canadian workplaces are the same. So although we will talk about these in terms of generalized information, it's going to be really important for every newcomer to try to consider their individual environment and their individual background when applying some of this information to the new workplace. So some of the key components we're going to talk about are language, norms, social norms, both in the workplace and in the broader Canadian culture. We're going to talk about values and beliefs. Those tend to make up the biggest part of our culture, both in the workplace and socially. So that's where we're going to start. I was speaking with a couple of folks over at Will Employment, which is a great resource for newcomers around language. And as I mentioned, for my family, when we first came, English was the language that we spoke, so it was an easier adaptation for us. So in order to be successful in the Canadian workplace, it's really important to be able to have a good functioning knowledge of the language that's spoken in the workplace, whether that's English or French, depending on where you land. So where we are in Southwestern Ontario, the main language is English. So if you are from a country where English is not your first language, There are lots of resources out there to help you with either getting an English language assessment to determine where your gap might be, if there is one, for you to be able to improve your English speaking, as well as referrals. So the Cross-Cultural Learning Center is a great resource that you can use that can help you with assessing English as a language, as well as providing referrals to other resources where you can improve your skill in that area. I know that sometimes we might have experiences with our friends or family where they may have gotten a job and our perception might be that their English isn't that great. So maybe I don't need to improve my English language skills. Really, you want to give yourself the best opportunity to integrate into a Canadian workplace, and also the best opportunity to be hired as an employee. So it certainly helps when you're in an interview or you're applying for a job and you can interact fairly well with the individual who is going to be considering whether or not you're going to be a good candidate for employment. So I would recommend reaching out to those resources. That said, language plays a really important role in the workplace in terms of the way in which we communicate. Canadians, as a whole, and like I said, I was going to generalize, tend to be fairly polite. I'm sure many of you have heard the jokes about Canadians over apologizing for things, sorry, not sorry, and those kind of things that have kind of come up in the Canadian advertisement. So we do tend to be fairly polite in our conversations. They tend not to be as direct as they might be in other cultures. For an example, I have interacted with a number of people from Europe where their type of communication in the workplace tends to be very direct. So if they may say to you in a performance evaluation, hey, this behavior is unacceptable, I need you to change it immediately. Whereas if you're in a Canadian workplace, your manager might say something to you that, hey, here's an opportunity for you for improvement. So that would pretty much mean that they want you to change something, or they want you to improve in a particular area. And if you're not used to that indirect communication, you may think you have a lot more time to address a certain type of behavior, or you don't really need to address it. So that's an area where you might want to ask more clarifying questions and say, hey, do you mean that I need to change this right away? Or is this something that we're just talking about? So there is a difference between direct and indirect communication, depending on where you're from and what you're going to be experiencing when you're in the Canadian workforce. So some other things about communication in the workplace: you might be from a culture where conversation overlaps a lot. And by that, I mean there might be a lot of crosstalk, or while you're talking, somebody else might be talking or interjecting as well. In the Canadian workplace, there tends to be a pausing between conversations or giving somebody else the opportunity to speak. And it would be considered inappropriate or even potentially rude if we interrupt our colleague when they're speaking. So those are some things that are not normally you're made aware of in your workplace orientation, but if that's different from your home country culture, that might be something that you want to take note of so that you can be more successful in that particular environment. So there are some workplace norms that we also would want to take note of, and a lot of this guidance would be about observing the particular workplace that you're entering into and doing a comparison between what was my home country workplace like, what is this workplace like, and what are the differences, and performing that gap analysis for yourself on how you need to adapt to make sure that you're successful in this new environment. So a couple of cultural norms that you'll see in Canada is that being on time is very important, whether or not it's for a meeting or for the start of your shift of the work. There might be some individual differences around Canadian workplaces where they have core hours and they may be 10 to 4, for example. So you're expected to be in the office during those times. But generally, you're expected to work a work day, which might be 9 to 5, it might be 8 to 4. The expectation is that you would be there on time for your shift. And then if it takes you about 15 minutes to get to your workstation in order to start work, then you would arrive 15 minutes before in order to be at your workstation at the time that your work starts. So that's really important. If you are late, it would be expected that you would bring that to the attention of your manager, probably let them know why you were late, and that it wouldn't be a consistent thing. So other workplace norms might be around communication or interacting with other colleagues. Typically, Canadians tend to like a couple of feet of a personal space between yourself and your conversation partner. So if you notice that you're in a workplace setting and somebody is kind of backing away from you or moving away, that might indicate to you that you're in their personal space, and you want to pay attention to that and make sure that you're giving them enough personal space for you to have a conversation that's comfortable for them. Making eye contact tends to be a cultural norm as well when you're having a conversation with somebody, especially in interviews or in interactions with your manager. It really does indicate to Canadians that you're sincere, you're having honest conversation with them. If you do not make eye contact at all, or your eye contact is too intense, then that might be something that they would note or would make them a little bit uncomfortable. So you want to make sure that if it's something that you're not used to doing, because in your home country culture, it's respectful not to make eye contact, or there are cultural norms around how you interact with your elders or people in position of authority. That's another area where you want to assess, okay, that worked for me in my home country culture. Maybe it doesn't work for me in this Canadian workplace. So eye contact is important. Other norms that are important is achievement and accomplishment. Those are things that we do talk about as Canadians, especially we tend to be very focused on the individual, even though you do collaborate with other team members and you work together as part of a team within an organization. Individual performance is evaluated based on your own merit. So people will evaluate your performance based on what you bring to the company. So it's really important to be able to talk about your personal accomplishments when you're in an interview. And that might be hard for people who come from a culture where it might be perceived as arrogant to talk about things that you do really well or focus on achievements you've had in your past. So again, that's an area where you need to look at to determine, okay, is that something that was frowned upon in my home country culture? And if so, what are the things I need to do in order to make sure that I can overcome that barrier and I can talk about my accomplishments in an interview with somebody who wants to know whether or not I'm a good fit for this job. They are going to want to have you give them examples of things where you were successful on achieving some goals or achieving tasks in a workplace so that they can determine whether or not you would be a good fit for their company culture. So that might be something you want to work on with a job developer if that is an area where you struggle with your confidence around speaking about those kind of things. So some other things that are to be aware of, it's very common in a Canadian workplace to be friendly with your coworkers, to smile, to give informal greetings, whether it's in the morning or you're leaving at the end of the day, and to make eye contact during those times. That would be fairly common. Depending on your culture, where you come from, there might be differences in how you interact with your boss. or with other people of another gender. If you're from a country where there might not be a lot of individuals working in your environment that are of a different gender. So you might not be used to working side by side with a diverse population. So it's very important to make sure that you are friendly, you're communicating well with them, and that you're treating them equally as would be expected in a Canadian workplace. So if you come from a culture where the hierarchy was very clearly established and certain senior positions don't talk to junior positions or things like that, you will notice in a Canadian workplace, it is tends to be very egalitarian, where there are not formal lines of communication where you can only speak to certain individuals, only make eye contact with certain individuals, or only speak with certain individuals of a particular gender or position. So that is something to be aware of. And that's where you do a little bit of a gap analysis on whether or not, oh, what was my workplace culture like that? And what do I need to adapt to make sure that I am integrating and successful with all diverse populations in the Canadian workplace? Canadian workplaces tend to be very culturally ethnic and culturally diverse. So that means that we have lots of people with different beliefs and different values within those organizations. And it is a responsibility of the employer to educate staff on what's expected within those organizations around communication, as well as around how we interact with each other and educating. We even are doing education around cultural biases. So that said, it's really important for us as individuals to make sure that what we're bringing to the workplace environment doesn't negatively impact our experiences with those people. I mentioned that I was a newcomer to Canada earlier. My parents, we came from Ireland. So in Ireland, when I was growing up, there was a lot of political issues around people of Catholic background and Protestant background. So I came from the Republic of Ireland, which is predominantly Catholic, and Northern Ireland was predominantly Protestant. So there were a lot of rules in Northern Ireland around who could work in what positions based on their religion. And so when you look at a place like Canada and you have people from lots of different backgrounds, and obviously that's not the same in Ireland anymore, but when you come from different backgrounds and you have beliefs from your home country where you might have a viewpoint about somebody from a particular religion, you have to assess whether or not that would have a negative impact on your workplace now here in Canada. Because we grow up in different cultures where maybe there were individuals that we wouldn't normally interact with in our home culture and that we're expected to interact with them now in our the workplace culture in Canada. We need to make sure that our biases, our home country biases, don't transfer into the workplace that could potentially create conflict. So that's important as well when you're thinking about working in the Canadian workplace. So the other item, so we talked a little bit about language, we talked a little bit about norms. So we're going to talk a little bit about values. And I kind of mentioned a little bit in individuality as a value in Canada. So being focused on our own achievements and accomplishments is something that you will see happen in the workplace. So that said, it is really important that you indicate to your employer that you are accountable for your own career. So although the employer might provide you with opportunities where you can grow and improve within an organization, it is the employer's expectation that employees become better and better at their jobs and that they do take ownership for that so that they will work on skills and improving their skills over the course of their employment to become better employees. And that if they want to have upward mobility in an organization or they have ambition, they do need to take individual ownership of that and determine what do they need to do if they want to move up in an organization. It's really important as an individual that you don't expect your your employer to manage your career growth for you. That would be unusual in the Canadian work environment. In addition, there is sometimes an expectation in a large organization that the manager may not know all of the individual things that you do for your job. And they may not have the same skills that you have in the job that you've been assigned to. And depending on the home country culture or workplace that you've been exposed to in your home culture, there might be an expectation that your manager knows every aspect of your job, and that you will go to your manager to ask them specifically what you should do and how you should do it. In a Canadian workplace, there is a value placed on initiative, and they do value employees taking initiative, learning new skills, suggesting ideas, and sharing opinions on how they think that things can be done better with positivity and enthusiasm. So that would be an expectation of a Canadian workplace that might be a little bit different from your home country culture. And if it is, that's an area where if you're uncomfortable speaking up in an environment that is soliciting employee opinions, then that's an area of opportunity for you to be able to try to get comfortable with that so that you can have a voice in your workplace. A lot of times that is an expectation of employees, that they will offer suggestions for improvement. If they are going to their manager with a problem, they're also coming with a potential solution or an idea that they think might work for as a solution. So that might be something to think about as well. So last but not least, we will talk a little bit about beliefs. We all have different beliefs. We all have different backgrounds, and what what we've been exposed to as we have grown up or experienced life in our home country. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's really important to assess whether or not our home country beliefs or attitudes could negatively impact our how we get along with other people in our workplace. So for some of us, we might come from more authoritarian countries that have very specific rules around whether it's our political or legal systems. That might be very different from what's experienced in Canada. So that can influence our behaviors. So for example, if we come from a culture where capital punishment is a normal part of our legal system, and we express those beliefs in a workplace in Canada, you might find yourself in conflict with somebody of Canadian origin because it would be very different than the Canadian political and legal system. So again, that's an opportunity for us to do a little bit of an assessment on how different our home country culture would be to Canadian culture, and whether or not behaving in a way that was acceptable in our home country might not necessarily be acceptable in the Canadian broader culture and also in the Canadian workplace. So the last thing that I will say is that there are a number of resources that provide guidance to newcomers around how they can either perform cultural gap assessments, do language assessments, or provide programs that give customized workshops or presentations on different things that might be confronting a newcomer when they come to Canada and are trying to enter the Canadian workplace. One of those is Will Employment, and I will share a number of links with Heatham so he can put these either in the notes or include them with the recording of this. So there's Will Employment. There's also, I mentioned earlier, the Cross-Cultural Learning Center here in London. There's also LUSO Center or LUSO Center. I'm not sure how you pronounce that exactly, but I do have a link for them. They're a multicultural outreach program that provides customized workshops, presentations, and training on a number of different topics, including cultural conflict, cultural literacy, and cultural competency, which can be really helpful for newcomers. And then, of course, there's the London Middlesex Local Immigration Partnership that also works with newcomers and provides settlement services. So I'll share all of those links with Heatham. so that he can provide them in the notes. And then hopefully you'll be able to reach out and see if they can be resources for you as well. And I think that's all that I will say on this particular topic today. If you do have any questions for me, you can reach me through Heatham or through my contact information that he shares as part of this recording.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for this informative presentation and enlightening information about the Canadian workforce culture.
You're so welcome.
And for everyone, as always, stay safe, and we are looking forward to see you again at another